Welcome. You're watching Channel 9 Fairfield Television. I'm Susan Kessel, and we're here today to do another in a series of November is National Hospice Month. With me is special guest Carol Moutry, who is with the Crossroads in our area. And we're going to do another show, or have done another show, on the overview of hospice. But today we're going to focus on hospice volunteers. How do you get to be a hospice volunteer?
You simply call our office. We hold volunteer trainings twice a year. We always advertise in the newspaper and on the radio when we do that. And so the way to do that is just to respond to those ads. Then we have a volunteer training session. In order to be a hospice volunteer, you have to take a 20-hour training session, and that's taught by community professionals. We hold our classes alternately in Fairfield and Mount Pleasant.
So the area that the Crossroads covers is Mount Pleasant, Fairfield.
We actually cover a 9-county area in southeastern Iowa. But I would have to say that the majority of our clients do come from Jefferson County and Henry County.
So the volunteers can come from any of those counties also?
Yes. And we need volunteers in all of the small outlying towns.
I'm sure, because there's that distance you have to travel, and if you're close by, I'm sure it helps. So you don't need to be a professional nurse or doctor?
No, not at all. Our hospice program has professional nurses, doctors, social workers, and chaplains that take care of those aspects. The volunteer is mainly there to be a friend to the family, to lend a hand to the family, and to relieve the caregiver of some of their burden. If anyone has ever taken care of a terminally ill person, they know that that can be a full-time job, and the caretakers need a break.
Right. This is a wonderful group. Is this nonprofit?
Yes.
It is nonprofit. That's amazing that you do so much. So how did you personally get involved, Carol?
I saw an ad in the paper for hospice volunteer training classes. My own mother had died about 22 years ago, and at that time we were in a small town where there was no hospice. We'd never even heard of hospice. But I can remember my dad having to get a neighbor to come sit with Mother just so he could go to the grocery store. And I remember that at the end of her illness we had to put her in the hospital because he simply didn't have the help to take care of her. I can remember being in the hospital and begging for pain medication for her, and them not letting her have it because it wasn't time yet. And at that time I didn't know that things could be done any other way, but through the years I began to hear of hospice. We moved to Mount Pleasant. I saw the ad in the paper for hospice training, and I thought, that's what I want to do. So I went to the first hospice training class to be a volunteer, and also found out that night that they were looking for help in the office. So I applied for the job, and so then I started working in the office as well as volunteering with the
And how long
clients.
ago was this?
Oh, 8 years ago.
8 years.
Yes. I felt that it was maybe what I hadn't been able to do for my mother, I could do for other people.
Has hospice been in existence for longer than that? You said 20-some years ago. It wasn't.
And it was in the United States, just not in the small town where we were. But it didn't come to the United States until 1974, and I believe it came to Iowa about 1978.
So the goal of hospice is being able to keep a loved one that's terminally ill at home?
That's what we prefer. The goal is to keep them at home or in a home-like setting, meaning that sometimes they go into a nursing home, but we prefer to keep them at home with their loved ones. And we have a philosophy that centers around palliative care rather than curative care. And when a person is seeking curative care, it means that they are trying to get better. When they're seeking palliative care, it's because they realize that that's no longer the case and they just want to be comfortable. So the focus of hospice is not only to keep them at home, but to keep them comfortable. Comfortable physically, emotionally, spiritually, just to give the best quality as possible to their last days and weeks.
Now I imagine a lot of volunteers step forward because, like you, they've been through something personal and they want to do something to make a difference.
Right. At our very first volunteer training class, our first session, they are 7 sessions. And at our first one, we always go around the group and ask, what brought you here tonight or today? And we invariably get one of 2 answers. Either I've been through this experience myself and I want to help someone else who's going through the same thing, or they will say, I've just reached a time in my life where I want to give back something of what I've received. And those are almost always the 2 responses that we get.
I know. I've read those ads in the paper and thought, oh, that's really an awesome thing to be doing. I wish, I could do that, but I guess everyone has their special gifts.
Well, and there are a lot of things you can do in hospice. A lot of people write off when they read that and say the same thing you did. Oh, I wish I could do that, but I'm just not cut out to do that, or I don't have the time to do that, or whatever. But there are so many different ways of volunteering in hospice. If patient care isn't for you, there's always our bereavement program. There's fundraising, public speaking, help in the office. There are all kinds of ways that a person could help out if they don't feel like they want to do patient care.
Okay, that's really great to know. Now we have 2 other guests with us. We have Bernita Pettit and Donna Simmons from Mount Pleasant.
No, I'm from Fairfield.
From Fairfield. I'm sorry. We're talking Mount Pleasant here, and I just threw that in. So, how did both of you get involved?
Well, actually, Bernita is at fault for my getting involved. We have been good friends for many years, and I heard her talk about hospice at a church in Richland. And she said that everybody should take this class just to know how to deal with death and dying. It wasn't necessary to become a volunteer, and I told her I really doubt if I will become a volunteer. But I did take the class, and at the last class they asked you if you would be interested in being a volunteer. There is no pressure brought to bear. But I felt a nudge.
So how long have you been doing this?
I've been doing it 8 years, last May. Mm-hmm.
Wow. And Bernita, how long have you been?
Well, I was here when the Jefferson County first started theirs back in '87, and we had our first patient at '89. And then I was a volunteer coordinator for 6 years, and then I just kind of faded out of the picture until Crossroads come along and I'm back in again.
Okay. And you are with the bereavement?
I'm with the bereavement program and patient care, the bereavement mainly.
Okay. Can we talk about what does the bereavement care mean?
The bereavement person, we get a notice from Carol. She sends us a letter, and she sends us information on the person that is left behind, of the spouse or the one that has died. And we are to make a visit once a month at least. And then we go and make this first initial visit, and the main thing we do is listen. That seems to be the biggest thing that we really need to do. And then to let them know that what they're thinking and experiencing is perfectly normal, that there's nothing wrong with them, that they're okay, and that they have to walk through their grief and they can't run through it. So they need to take time and no grief is the same.
So you're involved with the family members left behind.
Yes,
after.
correct.
So you never visit the home beforehand to get to know them. This is afterwards.
Well, now that's not always the
not
case.
always true.
That has been the case with me so far, but not.
We like to have someone who was a volunteer with the patient then continue on as their bereavement volunteer for the family, because they've already established a relationship. But that doesn't always happen. Possibly we've had a man in the home as the volunteer, and it's a woman that's left behind, and she needs a woman volunteer. Or possibly the family hasn't taken advantage of the patient volunteers and they don't know any one of our volunteers. We like to keep that continuum going, but that doesn't always happen. But somebody like Bernita can just go right in and make friends with them right away. I might add that part of our hospice program designates that we follow the family for a year afterwards. So in addition to assigning a bereavement volunteer like Bernita, we also have a lot of things that we do from the office. We have letters that we send out monthly. We have memorial services. We always send flowers and a card to the family at the time of death too. Our social worker makes a visit and keeps track. We just keep track of them for a year to see how they're doing. And we
wonderful.
also have some bereavement support groups, and Bernita is in charge of those.
And one of them is Caring Friends?
Caring Friends and Reaching Out.
And Reaching.
And one started in 89 and one started in 90. But the last 2 years we've combined them. And we meet the first and third Monday nights at 7 o'clock at the hospital.
Okay.
And I just saw a need for people that have lost loved ones to get support from each other. And they
Right.
have been very supportive of each other at these group meetings.
Donna, what area have you been involved with?
Well, I had been a volunteer for patient care, but lately Carol encouraged me to also be a bereavement care. And at the present time, I have 2 bereavement patients. I've mostly done patient care, and anyone that hesitates to be a volunteer, it's just us common people. You know, mainly you have to care about people. You need to be compassionate. You need to be dependable. When you say you're going to be there, you need to be there. You need to be a listener. Many times sharing with you helps them go through their process as they are dying. And sometimes I have gone into a home and they'd say, I really don't feel like visiting today. And I would just sit there quietly and be there with them. When I first go to a patient, I tell them, I am not there to be entertained. I am here to help you. And whether I help you as doing light housework, getting a meal, sitting quietly, or visiting, it's entirely up to the patient themselves. Sometimes the caretaker doesn't leave. Sometimes they just want somebody else to visit with. And so we play it by ear, and we do what they want.
That's wonderful.
I think Donna is one of those that's made the transition from being the patient caregiver, then moving on and being the bereavement volunteer for that family, and then that works out very well.
What are, I'm sure there's no pat answer to this, but the time length or involvement can vary from, can it go over years?
Probably not for years, but criteria says that when you admit a hospice client, they should have a 6-month life expectancy.
Okay.
That doesn't mean they have to die within 6 months. Sometimes they die within 2 days. Sometimes they will live for a year. Generally, it's 2, 3, 4 months. We don't very often go beyond the 6 months. We would like to get our patients sooner so that we can, but that just doesn't happen very often.
And the reason I was asking is because I'm sure you get really attached to the family, which has got to be
We
hard.
do. And it's devastating sometimes when they die. It's like losing a member of your family.
I mean, this is the hardest thing that the family's ever going to go through, and you're there to go through it with them, so.
And I think sometimes the families get closer to the volunteers than they do to anyone else, because my experience has been they will say things to you maybe that they won't say to their own family members.
And I'm sure this is a time where things need to be said when you reach that point, and it's very important. So what you're doing is, I really admire you.
Another point I would need to make too is that the point of confidentiality. When we go into a home, anything that is said in that home or done in that home remains confidential. We do not tell it to anyone outside the family. It is their business, and we respect their privacy. We honor the fact that they are willing to let us as strangers come into their homes. And it's difficult for them sometimes. Carol was mentioning sometimes we only have them a couple of days. It's a difficult decision for them to make, to let strangers come into their homes.
Right, I'm sure by that point they know there has to have something and they have to have help. And so, do they call you? Is a recommendation by a doctor or a nurse get you in contact with each other, or?
Anyone can refer a patient to hospice. We generally have patients are referred by nurses, social workers, family members. We've even had people call and refer themselves. Anyone can refer a patient. What we have to do then is call their physician and determine whether the physician says yes, they are appropriate for hospice. If they are, then we make a home visit. Our social worker and one of our nurses will make a home visit to assess the patient, and at that time they tell them of our volunteer services. Then once the patient's admitted, I call and talk with them and set up volunteer services.
And this is all free?
Medicare and most private insurances cover hospice care.
Okay.
Medicare pays us a per diem rate, which doesn't usually even begin to cover all the care that we give. So that's why we have fundraisers, memorials, memberships to make up that difference. But generally, Medicare will cover it, and generally most private insurances, and we never ever turn anyone away for inability to pay.
Now, how often do you have the training sessions?
We try to have them twice a year, and we try to have every other one in Fairfield and every other one in Mount Pleasant. Right now we have one going on in Mount Pleasant.
And this is 20 hours.
It's
how
20 hours. Mm-hmm.
How long, how many sessions?
7 sessions. Sometimes we have them in the morning, sometimes in the evening. We try to get people that are available at different times, though actually we need volunteers that are available during the daytime. We have a lot of volunteers that are trained that we don't get to use very often because they're not available during the daytime. So many of your women work,
Right.
and so many of our clients want volunteers during the day, so we really do need those. But we're certainly glad to have others that are available other times too, because they may be able to help us in bereavement or fundraising or when evening opportunities come along. But it's 7 weeks, and each class runs about 3 hours for 7 weeks.
And there's one going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
What does the training cover?
The training covers, it is covered by community professionals. It covers the hospice philosophy. It covers preparing for death. We have a tour of the funeral home on one night. It covers communication, learning to be sensitive, confidentiality, current concepts of terminal illness, symptom control, spiritual and bereavement care, all the different aspects of what you might run into, or the dynamics of a family when someone is terminally ill.
I'm sure the symptoms would be an area that would be very helpful for family members.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you're not a nurse or a doctor, you learn about these things and are aware. How many clients have you had in the area?
Since we've become certified, and that was in April, make sure I get my years straight here, April 2001, I think we've served 115 clients.
And that's in both Mount Pleasant or the
Mount
County?
Pleasant, Henry County, and Jefferson County, and we have had several in Des Moines County, and maybe 1 or 2 in another county around. But the majority of those are from the 2 counties, Jefferson and Henry.
Okay. So if there's someone out there that's interested in being a hospice volunteer, the first thing they could do is call you.
Just call us. And if we're not having a training class going on, we'll take their name and address and call them when we do have one going. And I would encourage anybody that even has the slightest interest in taking the class, because you're under absolutely no obligation to be a hospice volunteer once you finish the class. If you go through the training and decide, this really isn't for me, that's fine. You're under no obligation to continue, but the classes, for lack of a better word, they're very enjoyable. You learn a lot that will help you whatever you do with your life, and communicating with people and understanding, and gives you a lot of valuable information. So usually our fee is $15, and that just covers the cost of materials, so you really don't have anything to lose by just taking the class and then deciding if you want to continue with being a volunteer.
Right. Let's see, I was going to ask
Medicare funds us, and they require that we have a certain percentage of volunteer hours in our patients' homes.
And is one person assigned a family at a time, or are you
That's
with
generally
several?
what we do is when we first get a client, we assign a hospice volunteer to them. And we say, this is your hospice volunteer. And then the volunteer calls periodically, comes by periodically, whatever. If the family needs more help than that, because some people will just say, oh, I don't think I need anyone, or they will call occasionally and want that person. But some people have more pressing needs, and they want somebody there maybe 3 afternoons a week or 4 mornings a week or whatever. So if that's the case, then we will assign more volunteers into that home. But we always have at least one who is always calling and checking and being there for them.
And this, even if you do this, it's not a commitment forever.
No,
I mean,
no. We ask you, if you take that patient, we ask that you make a commitment to
Right,
that patient.
right.
And you know, if you're planning on going out of the country for 3 months, don't take on a patient now. You're always welcome to turn down a patient and say, no, I'm sorry, I can't at this time, because everybody has reasons why, for one reason or another, they can't do it at that time. We just ask that if you take a patient, that you be committed to that, and be dependable, and be there while that patient is still alive. And
Well,
we try not to schedule you with another patient right away. We try to give you time off.
give you a little break.
Yeah.
Well, this is a wonderful program, and this is a hospice through the Crossroads in a 9-county area. And we're talking about the volunteer program. Are there any other things that we should say about the volunteer program that people need to know?
There are probably over 96,000 hospice volunteers in the United States, and they clock over 5 million hours a year. Volunteers are a very important part of the hospice program. We always call them the heart of hospice, and they are, because without them we really couldn't carry on the program. Taking care of a loved one is a 24-hour-a-day job, and our professionals visit the patients intermittently to check on them, but they can't stay and sit with them. And the volunteers can make a big difference between keeping a patient at home. If you know that you've got someone that's going to come in and relieve you as the caregiver, to relieve you so that you can rest or so that you can get out, just so you have that support, then it's much easier to keep your loved one at home.
And how many volunteers are in, say,
Right
Jefferson
now,
County?
yeah.
Or
I would imagine between both counties over the years we've trained over 200, but right
Wow.
now there are about 50 that are active in Henry County, and probably about 20 that are active in Jefferson County. And they are active and they do a wonderful job. We just need more.
I was going to say, do you run out of volunteers?
Yes, yes. Especially if we have several clients that each want somebody 5 days a week. Yes, yes. And there have been situations where we felt like we did not offer the family, we're not able to offer the family what they needed because we simply ran out of volunteers.
Bernita, do you have anything to add?
I guess not. It's pretty well. Carol pretty
Okay.
well covered everything.
Well, thank you for everything you do, and Donna, for your 8 years of serving as a volunteer also. I admire you all.
These ladies are a great example of what our volunteers are like. They do a tremendous, tremendous job.
So I hope there is someone out there in our community that maybe has been thinking about this. Maybe you'll decide to do it and give Carol a call and plan on taking the training in the future and volunteering in our community. So thank you very much for
Thank
being here
you.
today and
You're
everything you
welcome.
do.